If you ever wanted to build your own desktop apps with Python, we have various options available if you want to create a graphical user interface. One of the best ways to do this is with PyQt. This makes it easy to create powerful and professional looking apps. And in this video, I'm going to explore the basics of PyQt, which is one of Python's most popular GUI or graphical user interface frameworks. By the end of this tutorial, my hope is that you'll understand the foundational concepts and then be able to create your very first PyQt application. So let's dive in and have a look at this right now. So what is PyQt anyway? Technically, it's a set of Python bindings for the Qt application framework. And this enables you to build rich desktop apps using Python. And Qt is known for its flexibility, cross-platform capabilities, and its pro-looking UI elements. That makes it really impressive. So if you use something like Tkinter before, or Tkinter, however you pronounce it, that's really great. But you might find that PyQt allows you to create even more professional-looking UIs with Python, which is why it's maybe a step up compared to Tkinter. But of course, you've got to install PyQt because it doesn't come as standard with the Python standard library. But the idea is that you can create complex apps that run on Windows, Mac OS, and Linux, all using Python. So like I said, unlike Tkinter, which is built into Python, you do have to install PyQt, and it's really easy to install. You can install it with the following commands. Let's head on over to the terminal and I'll show you how you can get it installed. So here I am at the terminal, and if I wanted to install PyQt, I would simply pip install Qt and 5. And that's it. You'd run that command, it would install it for you, and then you'd then be able to create your own applications using PyQt. Of course, I've already got it installed, so there's no need for me to run this, but you just hit enter, wait for it to install, and then when you've done that, you are then ready to start creating using this GUI framework. Now let's head on over to our coding editor, and that's where we're going to spend the rest of our time in this tutorial. So here I am, I'm inside Visual Studio Code or VS Code, and that's where I'm going to be creating this tutorial. And what we're going to do is we're going to code our very own basic app using PyQt. But before we start coding, let's go over the key building blocks of a PyQt application so you know exactly how it works. So number one, we've got the Q application object. This is required for every PyQt application, and it manages app-wide settings and the event loop. Then we have widgets. These are the UI components like windows, buttons, labels, and text fields. These are what make up your application. Then we have layouts, and layouts arrange widgets in an organized manner. And of course, then we have signals and slots. PyQt uses this mechanism for event handling, allowing widgets to respond to user interactions. So if you can wrap your head around those concepts, you're already well on your way to understanding how to use PyQt. But that's just a little bit of theory, but really the best way to learn, in my opinion, is to dive in and code something. Learning by doing is one of the best things to do when it comes to programming. And in this example, we're going to build a nice little app to demonstrate the basics and the foundational concept of using PyQt to build things. So you can build anything you want in the future when you understand these basics. So if we're going to create a simple application, we're just going to use something like a label, text field, and some buttons, maybe with a function tied to the button. And then that will give us a really great understanding of how PyQt works underneath the hood. So follow along in your favorite Python editor and let's get stuck in. And the first thing we're going to have to do is do some imports. So let's head on over here now, and we're going to import sys, and then we're going to do a bunch of imports from PyQt. So we're going to go from pyqt5.qt, I need to have a lowercase t. Okay, that should work better now. From pyqt5 Qt widgets. Okay, so we're going to be importing a bunch of widgets, and these are how we're going to build up our app. We're going to import the following. So let's import Q application. If you remember, I mentioned how we need Q application. We need Q widget. We need Q label, Q line edit, Q push button. What else do we need? I think we need a box layout. So let's do Q VBox layout. And then a message box, which is how we're going to send messages to our users once they do something. So, okay, I think that's all the imports we need. But let's run through what we've got here. So Q application, this manages the GUI application, and it's required for every PyQt app. So you will always import Q application. End of story. Q widget, this is the base class for all UI elements in PyQt. Of course, I mentioned that we use widgets to build our app. Q label, we use that to display static text from the application. A Q line edit is basically a single line text input field for user inputs. Think about it like a text input or an entry. And then we've got a Q push button, which is basically a clickable button. It kind of says what it does really, doesn't it? This is a widget clicking on the button. And then we've got a layout manager that arranges widgets vertically with Q VBox layout. And then a message box, which is used to create pop-up boxes. So if we want to give users information, if they click on a button, we want to throw a pop-up box to say you did this, we did that, we use a message box. And this is fairly standard. If you've done anything with Tkinter before, this will all seem somewhat familiar because it's slightly transferable. Maybe just the naming's a bit different. Okay, so we've done our imports. Let's get coding and start building something. So let's create an app. Okay, so we're going to create an app variable, and let's use the Q application, and we're going to pass in sys.argv. Great. And then we need to create a window. So we're going to call this window, and we're going to say Q widget, create an instance of Q widget for our window. And let's just talk about what we've done here before I do anything else. So we've initialized our application with the Q application, and we've passed in sys.argv, and then we've created a main window using Q widget. So now we've got our main window and we've got an application. We need to configure, say, the window title and size. Now, I had to point out again, in every PyQt application, you must have a Q application instance because this manages the app-wide settings and the event loop. And the reason we use the sys.argv argument is it allows us to handle command line arguments. But for most cases, we can simply pass it as is. But that's just what we're doing anyway, just to be complete in our approach. So we've got our window. How about we set a title? So we're going to use our window variable, and let's use the set window title set window title method, and we just simply pass in a string. So let's call this a basic Qt app. Great. Now let's configure the size. So we're going to configure the geometry. Okay. So here we go. Window dot set geometry, and then here we go. 100, 100. 400, 200. Okay, so now I've done the set geometry. Let's talk about what's actually going on here. So we've got 4 parameters passed in here. We've got X, Y, width, and height. So X is the horizontal position from the left of the screen, or a parent widget. Y is the vertical position from the top of the screen, again, or a parent widget. And width is the width of the widget, and height is the height of the widget. So we're passing this all in pixels, and that's what we've done here. So we've now set the geometry of our window. So at this point, we've got an application initialized, we've got a window initialized, we've set the title, and we've set the geometry. We're now ready to add some widgets to our app. And I think we're going to start with a label and a text input. So bearing in mind, we imported a Q label, so we can use that. So let's come on down and create a new variable called label, and we're going to make this a Q label, and we're going to pass in the following. Enter, if I can type that properly, enter your name, and then window. Okay, so what are we doing here? The Q label widget is going to display static text, but we passed in window as its parent, meaning it will be displayed in the main window. That's all we're doing here. So we're associating it with the main window. If you use tkinter, it's like passing in the root object. We're saying, where should we place this widget? Hey, we should place it in the main window because that's where we want it to be. I think that makes quite a lot of sense. So that is a basic label. How about we now create a text field? And we can use this with the QLineEdit class. That is our text field for PyQt. So let's just create a basic variable called text field. We're going to say QLineEdit, and then we're going to say I want to associate this with the window because again, we are placing it in the window. We're passing in the window as its parent. Okay. And what we could also do is call the set placeholder text method on this text field variable. This is essentially kind of like a hint inside the text box, a bit like placeholder text. If you've done any web development before, any web design, this will seem fairly intuitive to you, I think. So text underscore field, we're going to set the placeholder text, and let's just say something very simple like type your name here. Great. So we're passing in a string, and that is our placeholder text. Excellent. So now we've done that, I think what we could do is we could expand upon this app. So why don't we add a button? And what we'll do with this button, we're going to link it to a function. So when someone clicks on the button, it's going to be wired up to a function that's going to do something. So we're going to need a function and we're going to need a button. And I think we'll probably create 2 buttons. We'll create a button to submit and a button to quit. Now with the submit button, we're going to wire it up to a function we're going to create ourselves. And with the quit button, we're going to use a built-in method to close the window. This is similar to what I did in my tkinter tutorial. If you looked at that, this will seem somewhat familiar. If not, just follow along with me and I think it will make sense. So let's just create an empty function for the time being, and we'll come back to this in a moment. So submit action, we'll just enter pass, and we're going to come back to define that in a second. We're going to wire that up to our submit button. So let's create our submit button, and of course we're going to use a Q push button. And what we're going to pass in, we need to pass in the text for the button, which is going to be submit. And we want it to be in our window, of course. We need to pass in our window as the parent. So here you go. We've essentially said, this is the text and this is the window where it should be associated. So if you did follow along with the label in the text field, you can see we're following the same principles here. We're always passing in the window to make sure we associate it with the window variable. Great. So we've got our button, but what we want to do is when we click on the button, wire it up to our function. So we need to use the .clicked and then .connect method to connect this to the function we've yet to define. So we've got our submit button. We are then going to say, okay, we want to wire this up to our function. So let's say dot clicked. So once it's been clicked, connect to submit action. Okay, I think that's fairly Pythonic. Buttons clicked, what should I do? Connect to what? The submit action function. So I think you can read that fairly standard in your mind. It kind of feels like English. So we have wired this up, and now we need to do something. So let's define the function. And this function is going to fetch text from our QLineEdit, which is our text field. And what we're going to do is we're going to fetch that. And then if the field is empty, we're going to display a warning. Otherwise, we're going to greet the user. Okay, so fairly straightforward. So let's go into this function now, and let's say the following. I want to get the text from the text field. And we can do this using the .text method. It's a getter method for the text field object. And then we're going to call a string method on that of strip. Because what we're doing is we're returning a string with the text method. And then with that, we're going to call a string method on that from Python, strip all the white space. Okay, so we've got user input is our new variable. And we're going to say, I want to use my text field. I want to use the text getter. So I'm fetching the text from the text field with this. And then I'm saying, before I want to do anything else, let's strip all the leading and trailing white space. So I'm calling two methods, quite a Pythonic thing to do, chaining these methods together. The first here, .text, that is a getter method from the QLineEdit class. And then I'm using the Python string method of .strip to strip all of the space either side of this string. Now we need to see if the string is blank. So of course, if there was nothing here and it was blank, if I were to evaluate this as a string, it would evaluate to false, right? If it isn't blank, it would evaluate to true. And what I mean by that is I can say if user input, do something. And this means if the user input isn't blank, go into here. If it is blank, we'll handle that in the else. So then we can use our Q message box, and we're going to create an information message box. And we're going to say, associate that please with my window. And then here is the title of my box, input received. And then I need to pass in something for the main message body in the box. Let's pass in a simple F string and just say hello, and let's pass in user input. Now this makes sense because of course we've said over here, type your name here, right? So if the user's passed in their name, we're saying hello, we're greeting them. So what are we doing? We're saying, is the user input not blank? Is there some text? There is, great. Let's now display an informational message box. We're going to associate that with our window. We're going to give it a title of input received, and then we're going to pass this into the body of the box as the message that the user sees. On the other hand, if the string is blank, we go into our else, and in our else, we're going to use another message box, but a warning box. So Q message box, we're going to use warning, and then with the warning, we're going to again associate that with our window, and we're going to give it a title of no input, and then we're going to give a message, and that just says, please enter your name. Great. So I think that's fairly intuitive. I think that's logical, and you can follow along with what we're doing here. Excellent. So now we've done that, I said I was going to make two buttons, and the other button was going to be a quit button. So let's create another variable called quit button. And then what we're going to do is make this a Q push button again. Q push button, of course, what do we need to do? Set the text for the button, which is quit, and we want to associate it with our window because it's in our window. Excellent. Now I said I was going to wire this up to a built-in method. So rather than creating my own method to do something, when someone clicks quit, we want to end everything. So we're going to say quit underscore button, once clicked, do what? Connect, just like we did before, with our submit button. But what are we connecting it to? A built-in method for window, and that is simply going, my typing is atrocious, apologies, going to be close. And that is calling the built-in method to close everything down. So here is what we have done. We have defined a submit button. We have associated it with a window and given it some text. We've associated it with a function. We've wired it up to our submit action function, which we've covered, and we created a quit button. And we've done the same thing, text, put it in the window and wired it up to a function. But this is a built-in method for the window. And this is all done using the clicked.connect. So hopefully that seems fairly logical. You're reading through this now, I hope, and you can basically understand exactly what's going on here because it seems quite logical, I think. And that's amazing. So at this point, we have created essentially an app that is getting close to being usable. So at this stage, I don't know if you've noticed, but the one thing we haven't yet used is our layout here. So what can we do with that? What we could do is that we could essentially create a layout, and then we could add all of our widgets to this layout. Okay, so we're going to create a layout, and we could do it at the top here. If we come back to the top and we say, let's create a layout, and it's going to be a QV box layout. Now we need to go back. Whenever we've created a new widget, we need to add it to our layout. So we've got our label here, right? So we simply come along and say layout.add widget, and then we're going to pass in label. Okay. And then we're going to repeat this principle for everything that we have created. So same layout, add widget, pass in our text field, great. And then we've got our submit button. So again here, layout.widget, and we're going to say submit button, not action. And then we need to do the same with our quit button. So layout dot and then the quit. Excellent. We've now added all of those to our layout, which is fantastic. Now what we need to do is we actually need to set the layout for the window. So remember we've got our window object, which we created at the top here. We now need to associate the layout with that window. So what we could do is simply say, okay, window dot set layout. And of course, what are we going to pass in? Our layout variable, and that ties it all together. At this point, the last thing to do is to essentially use the show method to run this and show the window. And we can use the way to execute the application with sys.exit with app exec. So it's all quite straightforward. We're going to say window.show, and then what we want to do, we're going to say sys.exit, pass in app.exec, and that takes care of everything. At this stage, our application is now complete. The only thing we haven't done at the moment is we haven't done anything with regards to styling, but I think we'll come back to that in a moment, and we're going to do that when we expand this. So what I'd like to do is run this, show to you that it all works, then try and make it more modular by turning it into an OOP, object-oriented programming approach, by creating a class. But we'll get to that in a second. I think first things first, most important thing to do is to ensure that this all works the way that we would like it to work. And from that point onwards, we can then look at creating some form of, in essence, styling to enhance what we have. So first things first, let's run this. Let's ensure everything works the way that we would like it to. And then we can look at enhancing this with OOP and enhancing it with styling. So I'm going to save this, and then let's see if we can run this, and hopefully we will see our window pop up and everything will be working the way we would like it to. So Python PyQt tutorial, and you can ignore that error. That's related to my system, nothing to do with what's going on here. But what you can see is here is our basic app. Everything is working. We've got our label, we've got our text field, we've got our submit button and our quit button. So if I click submit and it's empty, I get a message box, which is just a warning box saying, please enter your name. If I enter my name and then click submit, we then get an input received, hello to me. Excellent. And then if I quit, everything closes. So it all seems to be working perfectly, and that's fantastic. So at this stage, we have created our basic app, and everything seems to be working exactly the way that you'd expect it to, which is great. There's nothing really more that you need to do. If you want to understand the basics of PyQt, you could leave this here right now, walk away, and be comfortable with the fact that you understand how to create basic applications. However, rather than leaving it there, I think it could be really helpful for us to take this one step further. And what we could do is we could refactor this using object-oriented programming. Now, why use this? For me, OOP, obviously in general, it provides structure, modularity, and reusability in your code. So instead of writing procedural code, which is what we've just done, where everything is executed in a sequence, we could define classes that encapsulate the data and behavior together, making this reusable for many projects. So what we need to do is basically create our own class. This class is going to inherit from a built-in class within the PyQt library. And then we're just going to define a couple of methods. And once we've done that, we'll actually be having a nice reusable way of taking all this code and creating a nice modular class structure that we can use to create as many apps as we like. And we'll also add a little bit of styling to take it to the next level, because that could be a bit interesting, because I'll show you some basic style sheet ideas. And this is quite similar if you've ever spent any time in web development. It will feel quite similar to doing web development styling. It kind of looks a bit like JSON. It's not JSON, but it's very similar to CSS essentially. So it's going to be CSS-ish. And once you see it, you'll be like, oh yeah, I get what's going on here. This feels very familiar to web styling. It doesn't feel particularly hard to fathom. And I'll just throw in some basic styling, and you should be able to read through this and completely understand what's going on. But we'll do that last. First things first, let's create our OOP class. Then we can come back to the styling. Okay, so we need to create a class. So how about we just come back to the top? I'm going to leave all the code here for now, but what I'm going to end up doing is I'm going to end up refactoring the code to make it work with OOP. So I'm going to end up copying and moving things around and making a few tweaks. But just follow along with me, and it should make a lot of sense. So let's create a class, and we're going to call this a PyQt. Okay, and we need to inherit from it. Great, that is step one. So what are we doing here? Why are we inheriting from QWidget? We inherit from this because it makes it the base of our application window. And that is the key part, because by inheriting from this base class, everything else will work naturally. All right, so now, as with any class in Python, we obviously need our dunder, which is our init to start things. This is our initialization method, and this is going to be fairly basic. So def init, obviously always passing in self as you do with any method within a class. And then the first thing we need to do is this super, and then we're saying init, excuse me, super dot. Okay, that is the first step. Now, why are we doing this? The reason we are doing this is because that we are calling super.init to ensure the QWidget base class is correctly set up. This initializes the application, and this is the way that we tie that together. If you're unfamiliar with inheritance in Python, this might seem a little bit strange, but this is just a key part to ensure that the base class is set up properly when we are inheriting from it. Okay, so we do that. Now we can actually start to use something we've already done. Now what we need to do is set the window title, set the geometry, and we've done that previously. If you notice over here with window, we created window as an instance of a QWidget. Okay, notice the similarities here, QWidget. Now we have a class that inherits from QWidget. So we are essentially creating an instance of QWidget with our own class, which means that we can call these methods within our class, inherited from it. And the way we do that is using the self, because of course this is an instance of a class. You always use self to refer to that instance of the class at that time. So we could then say set window title, and then we could essentially put the same as here, basic PyQt app. Or we could expand it and we could say it is in fact, we're doing OOP or OOP PyQt app, whatever you like. But equally, we can then take our geometry and rather than writing out, we could just copy that and say self.setGeometry. And rather than having those 3 bits there, which we don't need anymore, we are doing it within our own class because we are encapsulating this and refactoring it into a class. Great. So things are coming along nicely, but the next thing we actually want to do is that we need to call a method we've yet to define. But what we could do is we could define the method first, and then we will call it, and then I'll show you what's going on. So this is going to be our init method, and obviously we need to pass in the self instance, as we do with every method within a class, and then we'll just hit pass for the time being. But this is where we're going to define all of our widgets. We're going to move all of our widget definitions into one neat class, keeping everything nice and neat and easy to follow along with. And then what we could do is we could call that method here, and that will essentially create all of our widgets at the moment that we create a new instance of our class. Because whenever we create a new instance of our class, it calls the init dunder method. Everything in here will happen. So we're creating a new instance of QWidget, we're setting the window title, geometry, and then calling this method, which is going to create all of our widgets. So it's a nice and simple way to do it, but it's also a lot more powerful than procedural programming. Okay, so obviously we have this initUI method. We need to do something with it, don't we? We need to define all of our widgets. Lucky for us, we've actually done a lot of the hard work already, haven't we? We've created all of our widgets down here, haven't we? So what do we need to do? Okay, we could say, we could take our layout and we're going to pass it into here, right? And then we're going to take all of our stuff that we've done here for our widgets and also copy it in. So what do we do? I could copy all of that, or rather cut it even, move it straight in here. I'm just going to add some indentation so it all indents properly. And at the moment, we need to make one small change. We need to associate these widgets with the instance of our QWidget, which is here. And we need to do the following. We need to say, we need this to be associated with, and we're going to do that using the self instance. So self.label is equal to q.label. But notice that we were passing in window before. We don't need to do that now. So we can take that out. Okay, self.label is equal to q.label. And we're saying enter your name. Great. And then we're adding our widget, but we also need to add self here. So we're adding it to the layout. Great. Text field, same principle. Self.text field. Q-line edit. What do we need to do here? We can get rid of window. You don't need that now. And then we could say with the text field, self.text field, set the placeholder text. And then with adding it to the layout, self again. So notice it is very easy to take all of this and throw it into our new method here. Okay, so we've got that. What do we need next? We need our buttons. Okay, so we've got our submit button and our quit button. So let's take those, cut it all, add it here, add some indentation, and then what do we need to do? Obviously, just like we did before, add self, get rid of window, same here, add self, that's all great. And then layout is adding it, once more, add self. And then the same principle applies with our quit button, self.quit button, get rid of window. This will all make sense when we get to the end. Self.quit button. And then we've got this question here of how do we close? What do? We can use self.close because we are a window. Okay, what do we do? An instance of this is an instance of QWidget, which is how we created a window originally. If you recall, we had window equals QWidget. We are now a window we are an instance of a window already. We are a window. One instance of the PyQt app is essentially a window. And as a result, that's why we could set the title and geometry. And that's why we're saying self.label doesn't need window being defined because it is for us. We are saying that our label is this Windows label is that. That's how we're associating it with the window. But that still gives us the question of what we do over here. We made it self.close because we're saying window is closing. So we want self.close. Now, one thing else we've got to do is finish off here and add self to our quit button. But before we move on, what are we going to do here about submit action? At the moment, I'm saying, hey, we're just using this method I've defined down here, but that's not correct. We need to bring it into the class. So I'm going to preempt the fact that I'm going to call this self.submit action, and I'm going to take this method, I'm going to cut it, and I'm simply going to make it a method within my class. Okay, there's going to be a new method within my class. I need to make sure I've got indentation set up properly. And now this is a method that's callable within our class, which means I then got to add a self parameter here. Now, what is missing? Essentially, we need to ensure we are calling our self.textField attribute to fetch the text from there. So remember, we're fetching the text and stripping it from the text field. That is now an attribute for our window class. And we are assigning that to a variable, and we are working on that. But the only thing we need to change here is that rather than saying window, we could just say self, because it is our self. Same here, self. That is our self. And everything else is good to go. Nothing else required changing. At this point, we're saying this method is part of our class. We are fetching the text field from our class's attributes, getting the text, stripping it, assigning it to a variable, doing some conditional logic on that, and then outputting some message boxes. And we're associating those message boxes with a window, which happens to be our self. Easy, simple. So at this stage, the only thing we've got left to do is to finish our tidying up, really. So if you notice that we have our layout, okay, so we've done that, but we need to set the layout, don't we? We've added our layout over here, but we haven't actually assigned it with our window. Let's come down here and say self.set layout, and then we're going to pass in layout. Great, so that is the window.set layout that we did earlier. We've now moved it into our class, so we can delete that. And all we've got left from our procedural code is this. But what do we do with all this? Okay, what do we do with all of this? We're going to wrap it into an if name equals main block, create an instance of an app using QApplication, which is what we have here. And then we're going to create an instance of our new class, which is the PyQt app, which is essentially going to create a window for us. We're then going to show the window, and everything else is going to look exactly the same. Now, let's say we want if name is equal to main. Here we go. Let's now indent all of that. Now, that is all fine. That doesn't require changing, but we need a window variable. And our window is simply going to be a new instance of our PyQt app. Great. And then we can still call window.show because we have now got an instance of the window by using our app, which remember inherited from QWidget. And then we are using the same thing here to execute our app. Everything is now done. Okay. So what I want to do is I'm going to work through this one more time just to make sure you understand exactly what's going on. We're going to run this, prove it all works. And then once it works, we're going to come back over and do a little bit of styling just to add a bit of flair. Okay, so let's run through what we've done. So what have we got? We've got our PyQt app class. This inherits from QWidget, making it the base of our application window. We're using the init method to initialize the application, calling super.init to ensure the QWidget base class is correctly set up. And we define the window title and geometry. Okay, and we've done that all inside init. We've also called the initUI method within our init method. And what is this? This method is responsible for adding widgets and layouts to the application. We use a QVBox layout to arrange elements vertically. We use a QLabel to display static text, a QLine edit for user input, a QPush button for submit and quit actions, and we've used self.setLayout to ensure that we apply the layout to our main window. Great. Then we've got what? Our submit action method. Now this method retrieves the text entered by the user. If the field is empty, a warning message appears, otherwise an information pop-up greets the user with their input. Same as before. And this function is connected to the button click event using the button. We've got the clicked.connect, same as before, but we've also passed in the submit action as self.submit action because it is now a method for our class. Great. And then at the bottom here, we've got our if name equals main block, and this script runs as executed, right? So when we execute this file, it will run this. A QApplication instance is required for all PyQt applications, so we've left that here. Nothing has changed. We have then created an instance of our new PyQt class. We display it using window.show because that is the variable we assigned it to. And then using this line here, this ensures the application runs smoothly and closes correctly when exited. So I could save this. Everything looks to be in order. We can go back to the terminal, try and rerun this, and hopefully everything will pop up as shown. And then we can cycle back around and quickly do a little bit of styling. Okay, let's have a look now at our terminal and see if everything is working as we expect. So let's run this now. You can ignore that error because that's related to my GPU. But if I now grab this window, you can see it has run just as before. Let's submit this. Please enter your name. Let's enter my name, submit this, hello to me, and then quit. So everything is working. We are good to go. So we have now done something really neat here. We have used OOP and we've essentially taken our app to the next level. We've made it modular, we've refactored it, we've made it reusable. We're using DRY, don't repeat self principles for Python coding. And that's one of the powerful things that you can do, obviously, with creating your own classes. And it's super helpful for GUI development like this. Before we finish off, I promised to do a little bit of styling. So let's come back over here. And where are we going to do this? We can come into our init method here. Okay, so let me just get myself situated. So we have set our geometry and set our window title, but how about we want to set the style sheet? How do we do that? Okay, we can use self.set, that as a method that we can call. And within this, we can create a multi-line string. And then with this multi-line string, what are we going to do? We are going to define a bunch of styles for our widgets, essentially. This is like applying CSS to our widgets. You can imagine CSS, if you've ever done any web development, CSS is essentially cascading style sheets. It's how we apply different visual effects to HTML elements. Well, we can do the same thing here with our widgets. And we're going to focus on, let's say, the Q widget, which is the window. We can set the background color. We can look at Q label. We can look at Q line edit, Q push button, and we could also maybe look at an effect for Q push button, like when you hover over it. So it's similar to CSS as well. So how do we do this? As I said, it's very much like CSS. So I'd simply say Q, if I spell it properly, Q widget. I would then open and close curly braces. And then within that, I need to define some styles. So I'm just trying to make this formatted neatly so it looks nice. So we're going to define some styles, and I could say background color, and I could assign this a hex code. So let's say F7, F9FC. And that is how we'll assign the background color to Q widget, which is going to be our window. So why don't we save this now and just see what happens when I rerun the code, and you should see a different color for the background. And then we'll hammer through some more stylings. Let's run this, and then we bring this over. I don't know how noticeable it is, but this is now a different color. Okay, so let's carry on. Let's keep building out our styling and make this an attractive setup. So I mentioned Q label. So let's do Q label. Q label, same thing as before. We've got our open curly braces. Try and make this as attractive as we can. Now, what could we do? We could do color. And let's say we go with 003366. What else could we add to this? We could say the font size. We could say 14 pixels. Now, one thing I haven't done, just occurred to me, is I haven't terminated those properly with semicolons. Let me make sure that I do that. And then let's say the font weight is bold. And let's now save this, run our code again, and see these changes take effect. And if I bring this over, you should now see that we have bold and a different font color for that label. So it's all starting to come together. Okay, let's carry on. Let's keep going. Let's just rattle through some styles. Rather than me talking it out loud, I'm just going to type them out. You should be able to see exactly what I'm doing because it's fairly English. It's like CSS. When you read it, it just makes sense. So we've got Q line edit, and then we've got order. I've predefined some styles I'm going to use here just to make things a little bit easier. Where you do all your spelling correctly when you're doing this. You haven't got any IntelliSense when you're doing it within a string like this compared to when you're writing CSS, and it would tell you if you're doing something strange. So if anything doesn't work out, it's probably my improper typing. The eagle-eyed among you will probably spot that before I spot it. Okay, so that's Q line edit. Now let's do the Q push button. What can we do with this? 7 BFF as well. Let's say the color white, border radius, pixel padding. Let's say our padding properly. Padding 10 pixels. And then what else could we add in terms of styling? So there's font size and weight. Let's go with font size. It's 14 pixels. And let's say font weight is bold as well. Great. And then how about we add a hover effect? I said we could do that. So when we add a hover effect to the Q push button, standard effects like we would do if we were doing CSS. And the way we do that is the same as in CSS. We use our colon, say hover, and then we go into this, and then let's add our styling, and we just say the background color is going to change when we hover over that. So it's fairly standard CSS. I'm going to say 0056B3. Okay, I'm just going to have a quick read through this, make sure there's nothing egregiously incorrect. So background color looks fine. Q label, color, font size and weight. Q line edit, border, true pixels, solid. Yeah, that looks fine. Border radius, padding, font size, good. Q push button, all looks good. Color, radius, yep. I think that's fine. So let's save this. Let's go back to our terminal. Let's rerun our app. Let's have a look and see what we have now with our styled application. And here you go. You can now see, I could even make that full screen, which I don't think is the most attractive, but you can see that we have now got a styled application, which is looking, I'd say, a lot better than it did before. I mean, you could do so much more with this. You could get so much more creative, of course. The idea is that we apply some styling to our window, and that's one of the powers of PyQt. You can get really creative and make these apps look a lot more professional. And everything else, like we've got our hovering effects. Notice that when we hover over those, they change colors. We click submit, we can see we've got the color on our button there as well. Everything's transferred over to our message boxes. I could add my name, click submit, everything looks good, hover effects there too, and quit. Excellent, so that is it. We have now created the final part of our setup. We have added some styling, we've done OOP, and everything is working great. So let's wrap this up now. So you have it, we have covered the basics of PyQt. We've explored its key components, built a simple interactive app using both procedural and object-oriented approaches. And we've, by doing OOP, we've been able to structure our app with a class, make our code cleaner, modular, and reusable, which I think is a really powerful technique to get used to doing. But now it's your turn. Try experimenting with different widgets, layouts, and event handlers to build your own PyQt applications. And essentially use this as a stepping stone to get even more creative with building apps using Python. But I hope you enjoyed this video. Please feel free to drop a comment if there's something you found not very clear, you'd like me to cover in more detail in a future video. And thanks for watching this video. Hope you enjoyed it, and I can't wait to see you in the next one.